you pull anything up, that way it makes it easier to record on Zoom, I'll actually show it on Zoom. So, all right, well, good evening. Welcome again to another Bob the Father. First order of business, I'm guessing now with the change of time, should we keep this at 6:30 or should we move this at 7?
6:30.
6:30 still works for everyone?
Definitely not 7.
Okay,
Well,
great.
I have formation through the beginning of June.
Okay, all right, so 6:30, you just keep it here at 6:30. Okay, good.
They talked about not changing the time at all, or keeping it.
I think, well, see, I saw there was something introduced that we said we're going to enshrine daylight savings time, which means,
Yeah,
I think that means you keep on doing this.
yeah,
Because the whole point is you maintain more daylight
right.
for the term. So they were talking, the rationale they were given was like people want an extra hour, they want the more sunlight. So having the sun go down at 4:30 seems kind of, you can't like do like practices for sports and blah, blah, blah. I don't know. Personally, I think it's kind of a pain.
Mhm.
Also, it seems odd that like you think you're the arbiter of time. It's kind of like, all right. I mean, the way we measure time is a man-made construct, sure, but time itself is not something you really control. So I don't know. The arguments to me seem kind of lacking, but I think I'm personally of the thought that let's just get rid of it.
Yeah.
You know, but I don't know.
Central standard.
Well, I guess it made sense in 1776 when you actually had like a agricultural centered community. I guess it would make sense. You have more time to plant and harvest. Okay, great. But we are not really an agricultural society anymore. Or if we are, I mean, a lot of that is technology driven. So I don't know if it's really necessary anymore to kind of do that. Now, I say that, but I also have a brother priest who was raised as a dairy farmer. And regardless of the change in time, they would always have to get out there because the cows get used to being milked at a certain time. So it didn't really matter. So it's like, okay, well, I don't know. So I don't know. I mean, I think back then it probably made sense. I think today you can probably make an argument it doesn't really make as much sense anymore. Especially the spring forward that kills everybody, you know. When we came to the 9 o'clock mass, we had a much smaller crowd at that mass. I think because people forgot that there was a time change. I understand the 6:30 was a little bit smaller too. But 11 o'clock crowd was packed.
I did that one year, walked into church when the priest was walking out. Oops, forgot.
Yeah, it happens.
Oh, well.
When I was in seminary, I was signed with a guy for 2 years from Vietnam, and this whole time change thing was completely foreign. Like, so in November, I get a call from him at like 5:30 in the morning. Are we going? It's like, well, we got another hour before we got to go. And he did like, what do you mean? Like, well, there's this thing called like savings time that we do here in the United States. And so we fall back an hour in the fall and then we spring forward in the spring. He never really got that because they didn't do that in Vietnam. And then of course in the spring around March, I mean, on that Sunday he would then be not up. And so you call him, and wouldn't pick up the phone. It's like, well, I'm going to the assignments, I gotta go. And he would miss that day. That happened 2 years in a row. He would, wake me up early and then he wouldn't show up the next time. So I was like, all right, fine. Because he couldn't drive. I was the one that drove him. So it's fun. It's good times for him, Well, very good. Do we have any questions or any topic for discussion? All right, great. Good meeting. Thanks for coming. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Your turn.
Wow, I don't know. What can I ask myself? I don't know myself. I don't know. I guess maybe good questions are out there, like how's everyone's Lent going?
Not so good.
Yeah.
I had all good thoughts of how I was going to do this, and I think it would be easier to give up something than to do what I'm doing.
That might be true, actually. I think that's for the reason when we're younger, like giving up like ice cream and candy, and because it's kind of a good practice for when we become adults. Actually, you have to do things. So yeah, I think probably people share that. What I can share with you one thing I was planning to do this Lent, and it hasn't really panned out very well, is I was really trying to get my sleep schedule in better order.
Oh,
Right, so I was planning to kind of wake up like earlier and earlier every day. Until I get to the point where it's like, maybe, pray my office or get ready for, be ready for the 6 a.m. mass, which didn't really pan out too well yesterday, right, as you all know. So yeah, I was kind of planning to do that, but that really hasn't worked out, especially last week when I don't have a regular, every week we kind of rotate. And so one week throughout the month, we don't have a mass schedule for the parish, right? So if you're not on the 6 or the 8, you don't have a mass schedule, right? So I would typically just have my mass at noon and sleep unless I had some appointment in the morning. It was also a spring break happening this week. It's even more, easy to kind of, fall back. So yeah, last week was kind of difficult because I didn't really have a lot of things scheduled in the mornings, and I didn't really have anything to do until about 10 o'clock in the morning for most days. So, my evenings kind of went later, but I kind of fell short on this whole getting up earlier, trying to get things going. So I feel your pain on that. But I think it's important to also have multiple things we're looking at too, right? So, like I said, you can do one. I mean, again, there's no obligation for any of this. I mean, part of this is just to understand the devotion towards the season and what we're trying to do.
Right.
But no, I was kind of trying to put 3 or 4 things I try to really do. And then I kind of let the Spirit guide me in certain respects from other stuff. So I tend to find about a weekend I've been doing something for that week that I usually don't do normally. It's like, well, I guess that's part of my Lent practice now, right? So yeah, I think part of that's being open and flexible, but also discerning, what would be the best thing for me to do that I can actually achieve.
well, this is
And
something I
challenging.
feel that I need to do,
Okay.
that it's definitely something that has really been bothering me. And so it's like, okay, this is how I need to address it.
Mm.
And well, what it is that.
Well, you don't have to go into
No,
detail.
not in detail,
Okay.
but what it is more of, I will get caught, I'll say, okay, it's certain thing that I'm avoiding. And if I don't, then I pray.
Okay.
So it's to the point, it's like, okay, do I need to just say a whole rosary then?
Oh, so you're finding
So-
more, it's okay. So you're finding a lot more opportunity to do the prayer.
Because I'm falling short,
I see.
because I'm not, it's like, okay, that was an over exaggeration, but still, I did think that yesterday. It's like, okay, do I really need to do this? Because what I'm wanting to do is make it, because after doing it so long, it becomes a habit.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm attempting to do, but I'm not succeeding as well as I had hoped. And then
Okay.
I'm like, okay, well, maybe I should have, given up chocolate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good because you're kind of, it sounds like you're also challenging yourself. And so
Oh,
I think
yeah.
maybe part of that is recognizing in the same way that it's really hard and maybe unreasonable sometimes to think we're gonna go cold turkey. So maybe a good way of discerning that would be to ease into it, right? So in other words, if I achieve or if I don't avoid this thing, I immediately pray, but I'm gonna live myself to maybe I don't know, whatever, an Our Father. Right. And then maybe as Lent goes on, you find yourself kind of, being more achieving in that. Or if you're getting worse in it, then you can start adding more prayers on, right? So I think part of that is there's always, when we talk about forming habits, there's negative ways we can do that, and there's positive ways. So in other words, people are maybe trying to watch their language, right? Well, okay, here's the classic example of the swear jar. I throw a nickel in the jar every time and then I give that jar to charity at the end of the month. And that kind of goes with almsgiving, with what practice. That can be good. And for some people that might be beneficial. For others, though, it might be better to actually make more of a positive goal. So instead of saying every time I do something wrong, I'm going to punish myself, that every time I actually do something right, I'm going to, indulge in something. So in other words, I set a goal. So if I have a problem with taking the Lord's name in vain, I might set a goal saying I'm going to go a day or two, whatever it may be, and I'm going to be conscious about not doing it. And if I achieve that day or 2 days, I'll treat myself to something I enjoy, right? So maybe it's like grabbing an ice cream cone or going to dinner with somebody or hanging out with friends, right? Whatever. For kids, maybe it's like playing video games or whatever. And then you set a goal for 4 days and you almost like double that time, or maybe just increase that time incrementally.
Okay.
And then eventually you find that we replace those old bad habits with better new ones. So I say this because like some really do like the negative aspect, saying that really actually kind of need that. Like if I didn't have that punishment, I would still keep doing this. And that can be formative too, but the positive aspect can be beneficial as well, right? So giving ourselves a goal to achieve is much better than saying I'm going to get hit if I don't do this.
Okay.
For some people, right? So yeah, so that could apply to anything we do when it comes to forming habits. So it's probably good to look at that.
I have so much trouble fasting.
Well, it's only 2 days, and it's
I know.
like,
That's a punishment part. I don't do on Fridays because, you have to give up, meat anyway.
So you're saying that you're doing that as an addition to the 2 days?
Yeah.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that's I will say that's one thing I've been.
Because I don't have any
Fridays, yeah.
energy. I mean,
Yeah.
I-
Yeah,
I'm just not as
it's funny.
done,
It is funny like how that affects you. Like I found yesterday was my day off, and I've been trying this fasting too. And this might apply. This might be what you're experiencing. Like I slept a good portion of the day yesterday.
Because you didn't have the energy.
I didn't have, yeah. And so it's like, okay. I mean, it was a great sleep, but I guess I maybe needed it. But it was also like one of those things where, yeah, probably if we're eating more protein, eating more, I probably would be fine. So, yeah. So that's another question too. Maybe should I set another Lenten goal? Is like, maybe not. It's big with my time frame too. Like, should I just set, I shouldn't nap during the day or sleep during the day? Okay, that might help me with my time management when it comes to sleeping. So yeah, I mean, you can kind of work off those sometimes too. But also, but like I said, that's why being the arbiter of these things is kind of helpful and can also be detrimental because it depends how hard you want to be on yourself, right?
So I just set another goal.
Yeah, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that either, right?
I only did the first Friday, and it was like, it just couldn't function. It's like, no. But then other times, this past Friday, my Laura had her baby, so I got to call it real early in the morning. I barely ate all day
Yeah,
because, and didn't think about it, didn't think I was hungry, didn't think I was thirsty, didn't anything. And I guessed it. But Saturday, I was so tired because, and I even thought about it, but why am I so tired? Like, because there was no intake
Right.
yesterday,
right, yeah,
So it really does. I mean, it makes a big difference.
sure.
I,
Yeah, but I think you're right there, Gene, too. Sometimes we have to look at what we're doing and maybe, is this working or not? And then we have to reassess. Should I set something else I'm doing, right? Or not give up, right?
well, how do people do that? I mean, that's, like
Yeah,
you
there's
said,
people that do bread and water though.
Well, some of the great
Right.
saints, they said they would always be sustained with the Eucharist.
What had Jesus, he was in the desert for 40
Right.
years.
Right.
Well, he was God. So I mean, you can't, that's kind of a tough comparison, I don't know. But you hear about some of these saints would be cloistered. They would just sustain themselves on the Eucharist and that'd be it. That's all
I
they
don't
do.
know how their health.
Well, I mean, there is some level of nutrition, but I guess if you train yourself long enough, like probably even going to this route, eventually your body will adjust.
Right.
And so what you're going through is just like these kind of pains or challenges.
It's kind of this.
Yeah, kind of right. Yeah. So eventually your body will kind of like, okay, I'm used to this now. So great. But that doesn't mean you won't go through some suffering and pain to begin with, right? And that may be what you guys are experiencing. I mean, I think we all kind of, by this time in Lent, especially if we're trying to find all that bracket, I mean, you think about it, we're really 2 weeks in already,
Right.
right? Out of a 6-week period, which is pretty far in. And so after that time period, you probably start to experience these things. That's kind of like becomes more of a burden. I mean, you look at Jesus in the desert, there's a great debate about, well, would it have been better if the devil tempted him 2 days in rather than 40 days in? We're 3 days in rather than in 40 days in, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because if you think about it, it's like, well,
That's right.
you're probably going, your body's going to be the most stressed probably in those first week or two. By the time you get to day 40, they're like, man, whatever, you know, okay, great, it's another day. So would it have been easier for Jesus to say no in a human way to that bread at day 40 than it would have been at day 10?
Mhm.
That's a good question. You know, it's gonna be debated. So also, I think some of the gospel, I think it did say, and Luke was the only one that says it actually happened after the 40 days. In the other gospels, it doesn't really indicate when the devil came. It almost like indicate that what's happened over that time, right? And I guess you can interpret Luke that way too. But there's a good question about when the devil actually came to tempt Jesus. When did he actually bring the whole bodily thing? And okay, when did he approach him with the power, right? Yeah, that's a good question.
So you think maybe 3 different times now?
It could have been, yeah. I mean, the way you interpret some of the gospels, like I said, Luke had said after 40 days, but you could say, he could also interpret that to be like he was over the course of those 40 days that he achieved that goal, right? But yeah, so it's, you know, part of that is we have to go look at the translations and, you know, from Greek and kind of get that understanding. But yeah, I mean, some theologians posit actually could have happened over that whole time frame. In which case, you know, if I were Satan, I would probably kind of approach Jesus like day 9 and be like, your body's really needing some food. Why don't you get some food, right? You know, and then you start thinking about the mind aspect, like, okay, well, after like day 20, they're probably, you know, if Jesus, any normal human wouldn't be in the right mind, right? So they probably just say yes to anything, right? And so the whole thing about, yeah, look at this earthly power to be, yeah, that'd be great, right? Then you go even further, like kind of you after a lot of contemplation, a normal human probably be contemplating like the purpose of their life and what they want, and who wouldn't want to be God. So, you know, it's interesting that the devil tempts Jesus in human ways, right? Which he did the same thing with Adam and Eve and does to us. But Jesus defeats him in human ways too. So it's kind of a fascinating, there's a lot of richness in that gospel. I think some theologians indicate that maybe Satan didn't necessarily know what Jesus was. Because like when you think about it, well, because here's the thing, if he saw Jesus be truly God, why would he even try? Right? You know he can't defeat God. Yeah, but yet we would understand he perceives him to be somewhat human in some way.
Yeah, but at the same token, when he was calling out the demons, they all knew who he was.
Right. That didn't happen until after Jesus' ministry, though, right?
Yeah.
So this is at the very beginning of his ministry. So Satan's having his first crack. You're like, well, you can tell he said he thinks there's something different about Jesus, and there is, because there's never before been a being that was both human and. So that may have been the confusion with Satan, right? Because like I said, if he thought he had a shot at him, he would definitely go for it. But if he thought he couldn't do anything because he was God, then why would he even try?
Well, that's what I was wondering from the beginning, that I didn't realize who it was.
It could be. I mean, because not that Satan would not have known the person of Jesus, but Satan may not have known the incarnation, right? Well, he wouldn't have known that Jesus was God. He would have known, because at the very beginning, Satan was there too. So he would have known there would have been 3 persons of the Trinity, but he wouldn't necessarily have known the incarnation as part of God's plan, because the fall already occurred before that. Or may not have even known that the incarnation was part of God's plan. Which makes it so, well, yeah, it makes it very fast. I mean, we'll know eventually.
Well, yeah, but I mean, down
Yeah, but down here, yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting to like, posit these things. And that's what makes those gospels so rich. It's like, well, yeah, what you kind of contemplate, like, wow, what was Satan's perspective here? What was he really thinking? You know.
I
So
thought it was interesting that the stones looked like the bread. That's why he was saying about turning it into bread. I thought
Yeah.
that was interesting, because
Yeah.
I didn't realize that at first.
Well, even to say like, even the fact that like, like I said, you can tell there's something, he recognized something about Jesus. They had this authority and this power, right? We'll turn the stones into bread. Or that, or he's trying to knock his teeth out. I mean, I don't know, right? Was he trying to appeal to like hallucination? It's, being a deceiver, he could have maybe tried to deceive Jesus that way. Yeah, bite of that rock, you'd be fine. I mean, I don't know, right?
If he was an evil angel, what was he doing down here on earth anyway?
Well, yeah, but I mean, again, we have to.
Yeah, and why
We-
would
well,
he see it's his
See,
fault?
I think this goes in, actually, we had this discussion on RCA a few weeks back, and it's like, well, we tend to think as heaven and hell as like places,
True.
but they're not places, right? They're really states of existence. And so it was, I think if somebody asked a question, I don't remember if it was in here or somewhere else, but like, people talk about seeing ghosts and stuff. And the question was, what is the Catholic Church's approach to that? Is that possible? Is that something like, well, we understand there's an immortal soul, right? And as perhaps we're witnessing when people see these apparitions, maybe they're seeing something about maybe the state of purgatory. Maybe they are seeing demons. I mean, we don't really know for sure, right? Because these places we talk about, purgatory, heaven, and hell, are not like a room like this. They're outside of time and space, so we can't necessarily wrap our heads around, well, how can we experience these things in our dimensional realm? Well, because we're kind of limited by space and time, but they're not. Could they kind of do? Maybe. I don't know. Right? Could these visions, these apparitions that we see, be souls in purgatory? Maybe. I don't know. So it's an interesting discussion. And I don't think the church would definitively have any kind of, they would say, obviously, we have an immortal soul. These states after our life are states of being, not states like in place and time, like we experience in our bodies. So could we see this? I don't think the church would say yes or no on that. I think it kind of leaves the question open.
How would they know? I mean,
Right. Well, I mean, so there have been certain studies recently. Father Robert Spitzer has written a book about out-of-body experiences and kind of people who have come back from a state of death. So it's interesting. It's kind of an open question about that. But what he kind of has written about is the fact that there's been common experiences from all these people that have come back from that state. And so it's interesting, scientifically speaking, that all these people have this very similar experience. And what's actually fascinating is they can't put into words what they actually experience and fully do that, right? So, yeah, but that doesn't say anything about hell or purgatory. We assume they're seeing something of heaven or experiencing something in heaven. Maybe it could be purgatory too. I mean, that's the thing. Purgatory is one of those things where we often think of like this kind of like a fire where you go purge and then you go up to heaven or something, right? Or you get burned out, affect your bodily weaknesses, all that kind of thing. Some theologians actually have posited that purgatory is like, they're kind of analogous to the prodigal son. That, there's this anticipatory waiting between the time where the father sees the son coming back and the father runs to the son, right? So there's something of purgatory like that. It's more of anticipation of perfection.
but then you've got people, like you were saying, there's people that are talking about what they saw and
Yeah.
what they experienced. And it doesn't seem like, unless, well, like you said, I mean, it's not a place. So maybe, it is possible that their loved ones are coming to greet them, or they are seeing Jesus, or they are seeing Mary, or they are,
Sure.
experiencing this because they came to them.
Right. I mean, there's the scientific question about, well, were they actually dead or is this like a kind of an act of the mind that was kind of have this perception? It could, maybe, right? It could be both and, but even the fact they had the same kind of perception is very interesting too. And we're not talking about just people that are believers either. We're talking about people who really don't have any faith.
Right.
And so there's a commonality there. Very interesting. And I think it'd be interesting to kind of study that a little bit more. But really, we wouldn't necessarily know that for sure, right? And we probably shouldn't in some ways too, you know, until we're actually there.
I don't know. I'd like to experience it now.
Well, I mean, I think that I don't know. It's funny that you'd think it'd be very frustrating that you would experience something that you can't actually like put it into human words. You know what you saw, but you can't really explain it. But it seems like the people that have done this, they're very, very joyful with it. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's definitely an open question, something to be discussed and looked at. I don't know for sure. I mean, like I said, when it comes to things like purgatory, all the church really says is a state of perfecting. And there have been saints that kind of have visions of purgatory, seem like kind of this burning or this kind of like, kind of purging from, in bodily ways and sort of, what's a good word? Not to say masochistic, but like ways of like, kind of the body's been kind of beaten in some way or kind of performed in some way that could be suffering, right? Now again, when we talk about personal revelation.
So if they're suffering, it's because they're going through the purification.
Yeah. So we call them church suffering, right? So that's how we refer to the people in purgatory, the souls in purgatory. And all that really means they're going through this stage of perfecting, right? So yeah, I mean, we have to understand that when it comes to personal revelation, right? When people have visions or contemplative prayer and have these things happen, these mystical experiences, they have to be, they can't be contradictory to Catholic teaching, right? So that's one of the issues that was coming up with Medjugorje, was that a lot of, there were a few of these seers that were having these visions that was like, well, that's against what the church has taught, right? Or it was like, well, that's not what Mary told us last time, right? I mean, so I think they found a lot of those were maybe not, maybe good-willed, but they weren't necessarily seeing the visions that were accurate. And so that's why the church, I think, has said that Medjugorje can be a devotion, but you have to be careful about who you're listening to when you go there, right? So it's that's one of the big things that was keeping it from being declared something to be devotion to, was because there's so many of these mystics and visionaries who were spouting things which were either contrary to Catholic teaching, or they were contradicting other seers who were actually having legitimate visions. So yeah.
What about how some of the people in other religions, they tell people what's, prophesy over them about their future or things like that? What is?
Yeah, so I think there's with me that also too. You always have to be very leery about, okay, well, in what way is that happening, right? So, for instance, there's a book written very recently by a Protestant author, a woman, and what she was doing was she was basically taking a biblical approach, but she was actually like hearing Jesus, like Jesus was speaking through her, right? So she was basically kind of taking the place of Jesus in proclaiming these things. And in reality, from a contemplative standpoint, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just depends on what methods you're using. So we have what we call these spiritual schools that have kind of, talk about different ways of prayer, what's legitimate ways of doing that, and even, journaling and this kind of thing, and even a lot of these schools say, yeah, it's good when you're contemplating certain biblical passages to say who you are in the story, right? Where are you? Are you a third person observer? Are you one of the people that's in there? Are you Jesus himself? So that's not necessarily wrong. The problem, I think, with this particular book was there was the method that this person was using was actually an occult method of what they call, it was like spiritual writing. So in other words, like the people that were documenting this would be pretty, like, go into a trance and just start writing randomly, right? And that's used in some circles in occult worship. That's really, the real question is who's writing, who's actually giving this information, right? It's like people go to horoscopes or go to like palm readers, right? Is there anything wrong with that? Well, the problem with that is we don't know exactly what is being communicated. There could be legitimate good spirits that are they're working through these people, but there may not be, right? There may be other things at work that we don't really have any knowledge of. And so the church takes a stance that she should be it's best just to get away from them, because we have these other methods that are proven to be true, that work, that we know for sure there's actually a good communication through the Holy Spirit. So I say all that just because we want to be very leery about the methods that are used for these things, that people who claim that this tell the future. Now, could that be a charism of the Holy Spirit? Well, there's no charism of the Holy Spirit that talks about fortune telling or showing the future. Nothing's been provided by the church or through any type of the writings of the church fathers or the Bible, for that matter, which talked about a gift of the Holy Spirit being future telling, right? So you want to be very leery about that. Now, so in that same breath, we look at maybe like the visionaries from Fatima, right? They were told 3 secrets. But what's interesting, whenever the Blessed Mother reveals these things to people, she always puts in a shroud of secrecy. So in other words, like we look at the three shepherds from Fatima, they were told these secrets by the Blessed Mother, but they were not allowed to tell what they were until they actually occurred, right? So, well, why would they do that? Well, I think the answer to that is because, well, there's things that humans should know, and that also detracts from human free will in certain ways, right? So, yeah, I gotta be very.
I mean, there's different things throughout my life that I've heard and things that I've witnessed, etc. But then there's also, I know within the last, and I've lost track, but within the last couple of months, that, are really strong messages that what we're supposed to do and not do and get everybody, so it's kind of like, okay, are we listening, and to what degree, and what are we supposed to do, and how are we supposed to tell people, and how are we supposed to,
Yeah, so I think like giving like direction as far as like that, like you can look to Fatima for that, right? They were told, the shepherds were told, have everyone pray the rosary for the conversion of souls, right? And part of that was the conversion of Russia and these other, places, communism. Well, that hasn't really happened. So what does that mean? Well, are we not doing it right? Are we not doing it?
Right, Cluxton. A salvage team and Cable Architects are working together to figure out.
Okay. So yeah, part of that's kind of an understanding of like, okay, well, yeah, to do an action, a good pious thing is never going to be wrong, right? So in the same way, let's you receive a message in prayer that, it's good to give alms, it's good to fast for the good of these people. Great, do that, right? Or even if we fast enough, there'll be conversions. There'll be people that will, come back to the faith. Okay, great, right? But I think part of that too is there's always conditions involved. That's much different than, oh, you're going to lead a great crusade against, this. Okay, well, maybe if I'm truly discerning God's will, and that's what He wants to do. Well, maybe I will. But if you have someone just tell me that's what's going to happen to me, well, there's some questions I would have about that. Because what that really is saying is you have no will of your own to make these choices. You're just going to do it, right? So yeah, we have to be very careful about this.
Well, they were saying that because they know what's gonna happen in the future that you did do this.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, like, how, I guess,
I mean, how do you,
my question to that would be, well, first off, how do you know that? Who's revealing that to you? And does that take away from my own free will?
that, I worried that, you know, if it wasn't, you know, coming from God, then do you have an evil spirit attaching themselves to you?
Maybe. I mean, that's one of the big questions about these, you know, like this woman that wrote this book. Well, okay, is that a legitimate way of writing these visions? Well, it might be, but it may not be either. Because we look at, well, going back to the story about Jesus in the desert 40 days. The devil also used scripture too to try to convince of his argument, right? So what that tells us, and this is true all throughout history, the devil tries to tempt us through goods. He doesn't try, he wouldn't try to tempt us through bad things, or else we wouldn't do them. So even like the highest good things, we have to be very discerning about, okay, well, yeah, this really great good is going to happen. Okay, that you're going to be the central figure in it. All right. How do you know that? Right? You're telling me about something. You're telling me something about me that has not been revealed to me. Well, how? Right? And so the other question you have to ask yourself is like, okay, let's say I go down that path. All right, this is really easy for me to do. Right? This has not been, there's really no challenge here. I don't really feel this is actually what I should be doing. I'm not feeling a really strong call to do this, and the outcome doesn't really give me a sense of joy. So I don't know if that's really from the one that person said it was from. Right. So yeah, I think we always would be very leery when it comes to quote unquote the future discernment, because the only person really discern that for yourself is you. Right. And as again, future telling has never been a charism of the Holy Spirit. So yeah, take with a grain of salt. So, but that's different than But again, Mary, that's like different though than if you're in a state of prayer and you're receiving some message that also gives you a sense of joy, peace, and happiness, and you start pursuing that, and that's something that God wants you to do. Well, that's a little different than if like I came and say, Mary, I had this vision the other night that you're going to rebuild the church and create a new kind of rite in the church that's going to be great for everybody. Okay, right, yeah, right. And I would probably have the same reaction, like, okay, Father, well, I'll go pray about that. See you later, right? So yeah, I think the personal discernment needs to be done personally. And when it comes to things like that, we have to be very leery.
so what do you think would be the reason at times I know things beforehand?
Well, I think we also,
They usually
yeah,
are, this, went back to when I was 17 years old.
Yeah.
And I knew something that was gonna happen to my boyfriend before it happened.
now let me ask that, is this happen usually like in dreams, or is these actually like through some kind of prayer?
It depends.
Okay.
The first one was in a dream.
Mhm.
The next one was not, but it was kind of in one of those, maybe I was dozing or just relaxing too much,
Mhm.
And, there's been quite a few, but then there was another one, I was just wide awake.
Yeah,
And it was just adamant, and
Yeah.
adamant, and adamant until I finally went. And
well, I think a lot of people have experienced what we call deja vu in certain respects, right? Because I can tell you when I was younger, I sometimes every so often have like these dreams where they're very vivid, very real, and then all of a sudden, like maybe days or weeks later, I find myself in these situations.
this was, I knew these three things in particular. There's been many of them, but there's been three things in particular where a very close person to me almost died.
Mm.
And I knew ahead of time. The last time when I kept holding off
Yeah.
Because I was being made fun of, oh, here you go again, you think you know, and I'm like, and finally, after hours of not going, I finally said, I'm going, grandma needs me, and I found her unconscious.
Okay.
So, it's one of those things where, the other two didn't happen yet, but I knew ahead of time and I tried to. First one, it was like, I didn't understand because it was in a dream
Yeah.
until it happened. It was like, oh,
Right.
that was kind of scary. I knew ahead of time, but the next one I knew ahead of time and tried to stop the person from going out because I knew what was going to happen.
Sure.
And they just
Sure.
laughed at me, went out, and then
Well,
I got the
yeah.
call.
So I think that, see, that's what I'm saying though. I think there could be maybe some prophetic aspects of that. I mean, I think in the same way, some people have like dreams where it's like very real, or even, even in prayers of contemplative prayers, they're given certain like insights, right? I think that's so different than saying I'm telling you the future.
Oh, no. I
Yeah,
think
because
that's
here's the
not
thing, yeah,
future,
yeah.
it's more
Because I think part of this also is a recognition that there's always going to be a level of free will. I think you kind of experienced that when it came to fruition, right? It's like, okay, I can maybe do what I can to maybe prevent or help in this circumstance, but ultimately, I can't force anyone to do that either, right?
But do you think that where's that coming from? Where is that?
Yeah, well, I mean, so there, like I said, there's been prophetic messages that kind of happen that way too. So it could be from God. Part of that, again, it comes down to the discernment of the spirit, right? So, okay, it's always good to ask the question, well, why am I getting these visions? To what end? To what purpose? Right? And are they legitimately lead to good, or do they kind of lead away from good? So I think it's always important to recognize those and ask those questions when it comes to these things. Yeah.
It's happened a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Those 3 times were actually a matter of life and death. So
sure.
they were definitely wanting me to forewarn the people.
Okay.
And first 2, the last one, I kind of wondered if it was grandma calling out to me. She
Yeah, I don't know.
was in need, and she's, I was
Yeah.
supposed to be there later in the day, and maybe she's like, come now.
Yeah, I mean, if it's truly a mystical experience, and that's the problem with mystical experience, they're mysteries, right? So it's kind of hard to discern where they're coming from, but I think it's always good to ask where it's coming from, where it's going, where it's leading. And then if we know that, we can start to decipher from which spirit is coming from.
So I actually asked that next time. I asked where this.
I think that'd be a good thing to do in prayer, but also I think it's good to bring that up with, a spiritual director, spiritual guide too, to kind of get to the root of these things, right? Yeah, because I don't know for sure. You'd have to really investigate those particular circumstances, and it's also important to maybe ask the question, what would have happened if I didn't do anything, right? So a lot of that has to be discerned on a case-by-case basis. Yeah. So great. Well, our internet people trailed off. So any other questions, comments, concerns, heresies?
I thought it was interesting. We started Acts the week, and their theme was with Mary in the upper room. And we had been talking about, I know we talked about it at RCA, I think we talked about it at Father of the Father as well, about praying to Mary.
Well,
And
through Mary.
Or through Mary, yeah, through
right,
Mary.
yeah.
But we were talking about that a lot more last week, and it was just interesting timing because I'd never thought about that before and what really that means. And all the women had they brought their favorite picture of Mary and had their own story. And who was it? Mary Ellen Wolf?
Mary Beth.
And she opened it up with this whole, she had a whole series of pictures that told the whole story. And it was amazing how she translated it to women and mothers and challenges in life and, the things that you should be praying through Mary for, or that she could relate to.
Yeah, it's funny, we had, it's kind of the whole idea behind the communion of saints. And, the gospel from this morning, from today, it talks about, people, the Pharisees and the scribes in these positions, and this is really more an accusation against like priests, deacons, and bishops too. But you know, what he was telling his followers was, yeah, these people put in authority, and so do what they tell you to, but don't follow what they don't practice what they don't follow what they practice, right? So do what they tell you to do, but don't follow their practices because it can be hypocritical. And part of that's a recognition. I think it's kind of an old adage that, you know, you don't want to meet your heroes, right? What he's really kind of advocating is don't put people on pedestals. But and this is one of the genius of the Catholic Church, is that we have these men and women that have gone before us, and Mary being the preeminent one, right? Who, even though, except for Mary gets to be excluded because she was a perfect human being, she was born without sin, she never sinned, and I think but we can still model our lives after her, right? That we have these men and women, the community saints, that we can kind of relate to in some ways, and also model our lives after, without actually putting them on a pedestal. Because every one of the saints, Mary especially, is always pointing to her son, right? So, yeah, that's why it's never good to put the Archbishop or Holy Father. He makes infallible statements in certain circumstances, but you know, there's certain things with the Holy Father that are fallible, right? That we don't necessarily have to say, yeah, that's right, that's what the Catholic Church should be doing. And whenever we put anybody on a pedestal, we're going to be left empty in some way, because those people are going to fail us in certain aspects. But the Communion of Saints, that's kind of a beautiful thing about them, is that, yeah, they've had their little idiosyncrasies. They had a lot of them were sinners. All of them except for Mary were sinners. Yet we can still model our lives in some way to see the sanctity in their lives that we would want to strive for too. So that's kind of one of the genius things about the Catholic Church.
There's so
And-
many saints. Like, I don't
Yes.
even know, as a newbie, like what,
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
I
even
learn a
as
little-
someone's been in the faith for a long time, there's so many
Yeah.
saints. It's like it's even hard to, like one thing I've been on this Mary Beth Whitney sends a flock note out every day about the saint of the day, and some of these saints, like I was like, there was Saint Matilda yesterday. Like I haven't heard who she was. I was like, okay, but she didn't. I mean, it was kind of fascinating to read her story, right? Today was Saint Louisa Marillac, right? She's one of the founders of the Dissensions. So it's there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them.
that comes out on flat now?
You have to sign up
What
for
group is
it.
that?
Yeah, it's actually so there was a flock that went out at the very beginning. Asked people one of these
Oh,
this special group, they'll add your name. But yeah, I get one it's pretty much every day.
the letter name is the group, what is?
It's just the
I'm saying it for a flock note, but I don't get Mary Beth.
Well, maybe I'll just,
well, I mean, I think you have to, so in order not to get inundated, I think there was the option, like, you didn't have to necessarily, do it. But,
I went into all the groups recently and some of them are like empty, like not everybody uses all the groups, like there's a Boy
well, the
Scouts in
thing
there
is,
that's
you may,
empty and,
yeah, but you may not be able to see everyone's in there, right? Because only certain,
I was like, we're in
admins
the
and
Boy
super can
Scouts.
see certain
I
ones.
think I could see that.
I don't know, let's see. Where is it? Here it is, few
I like
states to
Flat
engage.
Notes.
So, there's 107 members in here.
So if you went in there and didn't see anything, how do you know what's there to subscribe to?
Right.
Just email me.
Yeah, email, you can talk to one of us, we can add you and stuff. So like I said, I know there was an email, there was a flock that sent out very early on, we started doing this. Ask for people, they want to be involved, let us know. Or they want to get these, let us know. And it looks like 107 people have said yes.
So each day she covers a saint.
Yeah, pretty much.
Huh.
Like even in Scouts, let's see, there's 36 members in Scouts. Let's see. Yeah,
Do you have the Laudate on your,
I have that. Is
You
it
can
in
read-
there
there's
too?
a-
Yeah, there's.
well, what are the options as Saint of the Day?
Oh,
Just like
Yeah,
the
so-
liturgy of the hours, a daily reading.
do you read it?
Sometimes.
yeah, so like yesterday was Saint Matilda. And here's kind of her information. Let me share screen just so I can show everybody this too.
Just leave it limitations, everything that goes with it.
So this was a princess. She was actually an early Saxon. So this kind of like before England was really established, 913-ish. Yeah, so she was going to be married off. It's called Maud for short. So it was her, after 23 years of marriage, the king of Saxony died. Let's see, she had 3 sons. I think at some point she got remarried. Where was that?
Well, it does say, see the patron, the second last one
Yeah.
says the second
The
marriage.
second marriages, yeah. I'm
Mhm.
trying to remember where that was from though. Yeah, I don't know.
So why was she made a saint? That's her like life story, right?
Well, she was a very pious woman. I mean, she prayed for the soul of her husband. She was really good to the poor. This probably would be right here. In her last sickness, she made her confession to her grandson, William the Archbishop of Mentz, who had died 12 days before her. Wait, what?
What?
Last sickness, she made her confession to her grandson, William the Archbishop of Mentz, who yet died 12 days before her on his road home.
Maybe she made
Oh,
a confession
okay.
before.
After the confession, he died
Yeah.
Yes.
on the way back to his home. And she again made a public confession before the priests and monks of the place, received a second time the last sacraments, and lying on sackcloth, she was ashes on her head, died on 14th March. Yeah, so that's pretty good. I think she was pretty well covered there, probably. Two last rites within 12 days of each other. That's probably, yeah, pretty not bad. So yeah. But then today was Louise de Marillac. She was this patron of the Vincentians. She was a French saint, born in Paris. Yeah, she kind of gave up all of the wealth of her family and became a religious. The order was, yeah, she worked for the she was Sister of Charity, which is the Vincentian version of the female orders. Yeah.
Oh, she got married and had a child, and then when her husband died.
Mhm. That's kind of, actually, it's very common to see that with a lot of women saints. They just start off as like, mothers and wives. And then by the end, they'll have to actually end up as nuns, sisters. I don't think it necessarily has to be that way, but there's a lot that kind of go through that process. So, yeah. So yeah, like I said, you can be added to this list if you so desire. Just let us know. We can make sure you're on there. So yeah. That'll be good. All right. Great. Anything else?
I had a bunch of questions, but I didn't bring them with me. There's usually not so much silence. Everybody else has questions.
Yeah, I mean, there hasn't been too many tonight. We kind of start things off. How do we start things off? I can't even remember anymore. It's a whole hour ago. What, Marilyn, you got anything? You've been
Very quiet.
Yeah.
Almost napping.
Almost.
Wow. Saw you dozing off there. It was noticed. All right, well, if there's nothing else, I guess we can wrap it up here.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming. Good to see everyone. Have a good night.
Oh, Sunday, we missed